Hey everybody, Plushie here, and today, surprise, we're going to make a hot take video on Nemo Noah. Yes, I've decided instead of dragging this out for 20 years, I'm just gonna do it on day 2. So it's going to be more of a hot take light, where I only go off of my 1 day worth of testing and calculations, and hopefully I'm not too wrong about this. But hey, I guess it fits the name of hot take a little bit more than what I usually do. So without further ado, let's get into today's hot take video on Noah/Nemo. So taking a look at his base stats, Noah has a very middling attack stat amongst all riders, so that is completely fine in my opinion. He has a base MP gain of 0.38% per hit on 3 4-hit arts cards, 1 5-hit quick card, 1 5-hit buster card, and 5-hit extra attack. Yes, he has a triple arts deck, so naturally his base gains are going to be a little bit lower. This is the exact same base gain as Neocris Alter, but maybe it's because he crits easier because he's a rider. This doesn't feel that bad, and of course if you're pairing him with other art supports, this will help you with chaining arts chain. So as usual with arts chains, there's going to be good and there's going to be bad. Taking a look at his attributes and alignments, Nemo Noah is lawful good and star attribute. Both of these are important because lawful good has a Gordolf 20% bomb boost CE that he can use, and star attribute has a Olga Marie CE that just came out like last week that he can use as well. And finally, he's also Rider, so there is a Rider exclusive 20% bomb boost CE, so he has a total of 3 20% bomb boost CEs he can utilize. As for his basic traits, I don't think any of them are particularly relevant. Divine allows him to combo with certain units, but I don't think any of them are particularly good to pair with Noah. I guess the most important part about his traits is actually the fact that he is not an animal trait unit, because you'll see very soon that his skill set heavily benefits animal trait units. Noah's first skill gives the entire party 20% MP damage up for 3 turns, 20% attack up for 3 turns, and a one-time 3-turn overcharge boost for 1 stage. And the skill also gives animal allies additional effects, including 20% more attack up for 3 turns, it also cleanses all of their debuffs, and finally it gives them a 2000 heal per turn effect for 3 turns. All of these effects are on a 6-turn cooldown. The animal trait is supposed to be a new grouping of servants, including Demonic Beast, Wild Beast, and Animal Characteristic. However, from what I've seen so far, all Demonic Beast and Wild Beast servants fall under Animal Characteristic servants. The only servant that is affected by this is Io, who has a passive that will transform her into a Wild Beast trait servant, but she is still not counted as an Animal Characteristic servant. So in terms of coverage, Noah only has 1 extra servant than Koyan Dark. However, this distinction is important because there are other skills later on that still uses the animal trait, but also considers enemies, and that is probably the main reason why they had to make a new grouping instead of just using animal characteristics. So Noah actually buffs animals a lot, which does not include himself, by the way. This is kind of important, so he only gets the base effects of this skill. So the base effects of this skill is already pretty solid, like it's a lot of party buffs, 20% attack, 20% MP damage, and overcharge +1, and none of them are card type specific. So this alone already makes him a decent multi-core farmer. But also, the additional effects for animal trait allies are really good. 40% total attack, plus the MP damage up and the overcharge that everybody else gets, is a massive amount of buffs for a party-wide buff effect. For example, Lilith takes advantage of all of these effects, including the overcharge, because her anti-charm scales with overcharge. This also, of course, cleanses all of their debuffs, which is going to be useful in certain challenge quests. Maybe just if they have a round start debuff effect, this can be useful. And finally, this can even heal your animal allies, which includes some of the other supports that can potentially help Noah, such as Archer Tiamat, who has healing as one of her shortcomings. So this is a pretty cool combo with Summer Tiamat as well. Overall, the skill at its base is solid, but when you pair him with animal trait allies, this skill is crazy. Noah's second skill increases his own debuff resistance by 100% for 3 turns. It also immediately heals him by 2000 HP, as well as applies a 1000 heal per turn effect for 3 turns to himself, and it is a 50 MP battery, as well as 20% charge for his other 2 allies, so just like Taikobo. But if his ally is of the animal trait, then they get 30 charge instead, so that would make him more similar to someone like Tezcatlipoca or 3rd Ascension Olga Marie. And all of this is again on a 6-turn cooldown. So yet again, a very solid skill at base. 100% debuff resistance basically means he's debuff immune against most debuffing gimmicks. Sometimes not, but usually yes. This also is a really good heal skill, giving him a combine of 5000 heal spread across 3 turns. Not evenly, but you know, immediate heal plus heal per turn is probably one of the best ways you can spread a heal skill. And of course, it is a really good battery. Even at base, it is a self 50, allies 20 battery, which we've seen a lot more recently, I would say. We saw it on Typhon, and then we even saw it on a 4-star Junus Crane, and obviously a lot more characters, Taikobo being one of the most known ones for it. But it's still solid. And especially if you pair him with animal allies, this becomes more like Tezcatlipoca's battery, with the 30% charge for allies, which we all know is extremely solid. We saw it on U-olga Marie 3rd Ascension as well, and Tiamat Archer. So really good battery skill, and combining this with his first skill, it is pretty obvious what Lysango want you to do with him. Pair him with animal allies, and he would hyper buff them in a multi-core setup. Noah's third skill is a self 30% arts up for 3 turns, and it also gives him a 3-turn effect where he gains 6 stars whenever he attacks with his arts cards. It is also a 2-time 3-turn invul effect. But if there's an animal unit alive on the field, which includes the enemy side, he gets an additional 20% arts up for 3 turns, so a total of 50% arts up for 3 turns. This checks every turn. This is not a snapshot, so if there was an animal ally alive on the field, this would activate. The moment they die, this will turn off, so you will see a dimmed arts up icon, so kind of like Tonalico's attack up. The same logic applies to his crit up, which is at base 50% for 3 turns, which is honestly already super solid, but it gets 25% extra per animal unit on the field. Now, there is no clear indicator like the arts up that turns off when the animal allies are gone, but I did test the damage with and without the animal allies with a non-arts card on enemies, and still, with animal allies, the crit damage was significantly higher. I did do multiple tests as well, so I'm pretty confident that this does update live. And all of this is on a 6-turn cooldown. So even at base, this is a pretty solid arts crit skill set. It has the 30% arts up for a triple arts deck servant, which is really nice. It has 50% crit up at least, and it even helps him generate 6 stars whenever he picks his arts card. So he doesn't actually need to pick his crappy quick card for stars, he can just pick his arts cards. And of course, it also has the 2-time 3-turn invul effect as a, you know, basic hard survival skill, which I mean is really solid, don't get me wrong. But of course, when there are animal allies on the field, the steroid parts of this skill becomes kind of crazy. 50% arts up for 3 turns is super solid, and the crit up can go very high. Even if you don't care about enemies, you can boost this to 100% by just having 2 animal trait allies on your team. Overall, this is again, just like all of his other skills, really solid at base already, but extremely powerful when there are animal units on the field present. This one doesn't even necessarily require them to be allies. In terms of passives, they're pretty tame. Riding A doesn't really matter because he doesn't want to pick his quick card anyways. Mag Resistance B, 17.5% extra debuff resist on top of his second skill's 100%, can counteract other enemies' item construction, which is a passive that increases debuff chance, so that's pretty cool, I guess. Independent Action EX buffs his crit up even more, which he is kind of a crit-based servant despite being art, so cool. And Divinity, which completely does nothing other than giving him the divine trait. So passives, pretty tame. And finally, Noah's MP is an AoE 5-hit Arts MP that gives himself a 50% P-mod against giant enemies for 1 turn before damage, and a 50% power mod against super large enemies for 50% for 1 turn before damage. And the MP, after damage, charges the entire party's MP gauge by 10%, and for animal trait allies, an additional 10%. And finally, the overcharge effect is a 3-turn MP damage up before damage, which is a ramping effect that starts from 10% all the way up to 30%. So really solid MP. Again, on its own, it does have 2 power mods. Giant isn't awfully common, but super large is surprisingly common. A lot of bosses are super large, as well as farming nodes mid bosses. So if you take a look at the list here, a lot of these are common second wave enemies present in 90++, meaning that he can actually dish out a decent amount of damage to even single enemy waves as an AoE unit. The MP, of course, has party MP charge effect as well. We've seen on multiple servants yet again, and it helps a lot in multi-core, and in challenge quest it can charge other supports that is helping him so that they can spam their MP better. Better yet, this charges animal trait allies by a total of 20 instead of just 10. Again, giving him wonderful synergy as a main DPS with Tamamo and Tiamat Archer, and of course other animal trait supports that aren't as relevant. And in multi-core farming, this plus his second skill is a total of 50% charge for an animal ally. So if you're using him to clear wave 1, he is a 50 charger to his other animal trait allies for multi-core, which is kind of nuts. And finally, the overcharge effect is even a ramp up. Finally, it's not just a 1-turn effect, this actually ramps up, so I'm actually completely fine with it. This helps with his single core looping damage mostly, and it's great. As a farmer, Noah is pretty solid on both fronts. First and foremost, he can be a single core arts looper. These calculations, in terms of comparing Noah to other AoE Arts SSR riders, are done under the assumption that they are only buffed by double Castoria, farming against 3 neutral class enemies, and of course their damage is both calculated for at MP1 and MP5 to show the impact of MP upgrades affecting lower MP levels more than higher MP levels. The refund numbers here are just supposed to be relative so that it can show who has better refund than another, but the numbers here are not supposed to be super accurate, unlike the damage numbers. So comparing Noah to the other 3 AoE Arts SSR riders, his damage is very, very solid. Looking at his MP1 damage, he only loses to Odysseus, who has an MP upgrade, so he should have all the advantages in the world at MP1. However, even then, Noah catches up to his damage on wave 3 because he has an MP ramp-up effect. And of course, comparing that to Da Vinci Rider or Bakken, none of their damage even comes close to Noah. And of course, the damage becomes even closer between Noah and Odysseus if both are at MP5, because MP upgrades, again, affect lower MP levels more than higher MP levels. So Noah easily surpasses Odysseus' damage by wave 2, and honestly, basically matches his damage on wave 1 as well. Looking at the refund numbers, Noah is still extremely solid, partially because his MP actually recharges himself by 10% flat whenever he uses it. His refund numbers only loses to Da Vinci Rider, but comparing Noah to other ones like Odysseus and Bakken, he again has a clear advantage. So this isn't his best role at all, single core looping, but it's nice to know that if you want to use him in this role, he can perform pretty well. One more interesting thing about Noah's single core looping performance is that his third skill gives him 20% more arts up whenever there are animal units present on the field. So obviously, if you are looping against animal enemies, then his performance is going to be even better than what you've seen earlier. But you can also include arts looping supports that has the animal unit trait to further bolster his damage and refund. The 2 most prevalent units that fit this bill are Tamamo no Mae Caster and Tiamat Archer. And as you can see here, compared to Castoria, these are the buff numbers that they are able to provide to Noah specifically when not considering using their MPs. Tamamo is a pretty big highlight here because she actually gives more damage buffs than Castoria, even though you're losing a lot of MP batteries and MP gain up. But you can potentially replace one Castoria with Tamamo, especially if you're considered plugging in Oberon for your third wave damage, if you can handle the refund. Tiamat, on the other hand, I personally would not use over Castoria because her total amount of buff numbers are still lower than Castoria, even with the Noah skill 3 considered. But you can also, of course, use both of these as tertiary art supports on top of double Castoria if you want more even damage across 3 different waves. Just make sure that they are on the field when Noah is looping. But of course, Noah's more prevalent role is going to be his performance in multi-core farming. And here I'm going to compare him to a couple of other party charging multi-core farmers, including Taikobo, who is in the same class as Noah, as well as Tezcatlipoca and U-olga Marie, because most of these are usually hitting neutral instead of counterclass, as opposed to some characters such as Lohi, who's a berserker who's always hitting counterclass, or characters like Junis Crane or Typhon, who's hitting 1.5 times multiplier against either knights or cavalries. Taking a look at their buff numbers, Noah, even without buffing animals, is already pretty solid. Compare that to his peer Taikobo, it's already looking like a bit of an upgrade, because yes, Taikobo does technically have more numbers in total buffs, but part of it is tied to the quick card type. So if you're buffing a non-quick unit, Noah is going to be very distinctively better. And of course, the overcharge, depending on who they're buffing, can be very impactful, as well as the 10% extra charge, making Noah technically a 30 charger instead of a 20 charger, and that is quite impactful. But when you compare that to someone like Tezcatlipoca or Olga Marie, yes, the buffs honestly still kind of hold up. You know, Tez can only buff 20% attack up unless the target also has guts on them at that time, and Olga Marie needs to use her MP in order to get more than 20% attack up for the party. But of course, they have directly 30% MP charge just on their skills for their allies, and 10% more if they get to use their MPs. So Noah does lose out on the charge department compared to these other higher tier multi-core farmers. And finally, we also can take a look at their raw MP damage when not consider any external buffers, because I do believe that is quite important in terms of evaluating a multi-core farmer. And at MP2, you know, his damage is pretty serviceable. And in fact, the highest out of the 4 that we're comparing today, higher than Tez, because Tez is inherently of a less offensive class in Assassin, and higher than Olga Marie because Olga Marie's raw MP damage without skill 3 is probably one of the worst in the game. So that's not very surprising here either. But of course, the real juicy part comes in when he is supporting an animal trait ally. As you can see here, the buff numbers gets bumped up because the attack up literally doubles into 40%. The charge number actually goes from 20 to 30% to 30 to 50% because the base charge effect on the skill goes from 20 to 30%, and the MP charge effect goes from 10 to 20% as well. So if you get to use his MP first on an earlier wave, he's a 50 charger to any animal allies he has in the party, which is of course extremely powerful. And then finally, his own damage is also bolstered by having an animal ally because his third skill gives him 20% more arts up. So it suddenly becomes leagues higher than all of these other multi-core farmers. Noah even gives the previous quote-unquote best animal buffer multi-core farmer, Koyan Dark, a run for her money. Because Noah has better buffs, especially considering it's more universal than Koyan Dark. He does have one less stage of overcharge than Koyan Dark, but other than a couple of very specific units, the overcharge one stage does not matter as much. And then finally, of course, Noah has way better charge than Koyan Dark because he has the potential to charge animal allies by 50% instead of just 30%, and he charges himself by 50% instead of 30% like Koyan Dark. So it's a lot easier to enable Noah's MP on earlier waves. His damage, of course, also a lot better than Koyan Dark Raw at MP2 because of that extra buff he gets from having an animal on the field. Noah can virtually work with any animal trait servant in multi-core farming and it will work out well, especially considering none of his buffs are card type dependent. But I do want to highlight Lilith in particular as his definitive best single target partner. Lilith is already one of the best multi-core farming single targets because of her big battery and her massive MP damage. She is of course also an animal trait servant that pairs very well with Noah, and her anti-charm damage scales with overcharge, meaning that Noah's first skill with the one stage of overcharge can bolster her MP damage even further than another random animal trait servant. In fact, if we take a look at Lilith's MP damage while being buffed by Summer Scotty versus while being buffed by Noah, they're essentially the same number. This is extremely impressive considering Summer Scotty is a dedicated meta support that is supposed to maximize quick damage. So if you use Lilith as one of your main multi-core farming single targets, then Noah is gonna be even more valuable to your account in particular. Again, he can work with any other animal trait servant. If we take a look at some other single targets, Benyema is a great choice as well, considering she also has party-wide buffs and charge. Having Noah on your team also incentivizes you to use Summer Tiamat as your dedicated buffer for multi-core, considering all of her buffs and charge are AoE as well. In fact, Noah, Lilith, Summer Tiamat is a pretty good trio, considering Lilith is quick and Noah is arts, and Summer Tiamat buffs both. So after seeing the praises of Noah, I suppose I should also bring up a couple of his shortcomings in terms of multi-core farming. Number one being, if he's not buffing an animal trait ally, he just feels like a slightly better version of Taikobo, which in this day and age, not the most impressive thing ever. Noah's second problem, in my opinion, is actually clashing too hard with U-olga Marie in terms of their roles in multi-core farming. Even if we assume Noah is buffing an animal, if we take a look at their total buff numbers, they both have overcharge +1, they both have self 50 MP battery and 30% for their allies, and their MP can both charge their allies as well, even though Noah can charge animals by 20%, while Olga can only charge them by 10%. At the same MP levels, Olga obviously loses to Noah by a lot because she doesn't buff nearly as much, nor does she does nearly as good damage. However, I know a lot of people have highly invested in Olga's, and if you have Olga at MP 5, her total buff numbers are going to be 50% attack up, which is creeping closer to Noah's damage for animals. And also, her low inherent damage is not going to be that big of a problem if you hyper invest in her. So if you already have a highly invested in Olga Marie, you might not want to pull for Noah even if you already have an animal trait ally, because you might just be using them with Olga and you'd be having something very similar. And then finally, Noah himself not being an animal trait servant is also a bit of a problem because he cannot run double Noah as a simplified system for easier farming nodes. Using both Noah's battery skills and with their appends at max is still not enough to charge either of the Noahs to 100%. They are both at 90%. Obviously, you can fix that with a Mystic code, but that does add more restriction to your team build in terms of multi-core farming. So I do like to nitpick that as well as kind of a third weakness for Noah's multi-core farming performance. As a challenge quest unit, Noah at base is already pretty solid and he fits very well into the arts playstyle. His first skill has a party-wide overcharge +1 effect that synergizes very well with Castoria's solemn defense. Both his MP and his skill has party-wide MP charge effects, which again helps your other art supports get their MP. He also has a very interesting 100% debuff resistance on his second skill, so that he is particularly good against debuff heavy bosses, where he has pseudo debuff immunity for 3 turns and on a generally really high uptime. He can also heal himself with his second skill, so you don't necessarily have to include a healer on the team even if you use Black Grill with him. And on his third skill, he even has a little bit of capacity to crit, giving him the ability to generate stars with arts cards, as well as just has a pretty solid crit steroid. Even his MP has anti-super large, which is pretty common amongst main story bosses as long as they are a big enemy, and it ramps up. So, you know, if you get to spam his MP, which is not very hard, he's gonna hit harder and harder, and he's also always gonna have that MP damage up effect on himself even after his skill duration runs out. However, Noah is all about that animal synergy, and luckily enough, in the arts support realm, there are 2 pretty prominent animal trait servants, Tamamo Caster and Tiamat Archer. Having these animal trait servants in your party, of course, makes his third skill stronger, so he gets a little bit more arts and a decent amount more crit ups. But arguably more importantly, in my opinion, is his ability to charge these animal trait supports MP a lot better. His skill, of course, gives them directly 30% charge instead of just 20, and whenever he uses his MP, which he's going to be using very often, he charges them by 20%. So Noah is basically still doing whatever he already does well, which is spamming his MP and then charging the entire party while doing that, but he just does it a little bit better for animal trait supports in particular. If you want to run him as a support, I personally don't think you're gonna pick him over a standard support. Noah is a great like utility piece for specific game plans, such as bosses that like to debuff you at round start. If you are running an animal main DPS, then Noah's first skill can suddenly come into play quite a bit. You can even sacrifice Noah with a taunt CE after using all his skills, because his first skill is really valuable for an animal trait servant. It's a lot of heals, a lot of buffs, a cleanse, and even overcharge. So he's gonna be more of a I use all his skills and I plug him out, or I use all his skills and I hope enemy kills him kind of support for animals in challenge quests, rather than a support that you want to keep alive, but that sometimes is already valuable enough. In conclusion, Noah is a really solid but relatively plain character at base that quickly becomes S tier when paired with an animal trait ally. As a single core looper, he has really decent refund and damage, as well as a ramp up MP, and even an anti-trait in super large that is going to hit 90% of 90++ wave 2 enemies. As a multi-core farmer, again at base he is pretty solid. He's basically an upgraded version of Taikobo that also isn't card type specific. But when you pair him with an animal trait ally, he suddenly becomes arguably one of the best multi-core farmers in the entire game. As a challenge quest DPS, Noah plays very well into the arts playstyle. And of course, when you pair him specifically with animal trait supports, he can buff them even more with more MP charge, and also slightly increase the effectiveness of his own damage steroids. Luckily enough, we have both Tamamo Caster and Tiamat Archer as art supports that also boast the animal trait, so he has extraordinary combo with these 2 units. As a pure support, Noah is usually going to be used as a utility piece, mainly a debuff cleanser that can also give your animal trait servants a bunch of buffs, overcharge, and even 30% MP charge. However, after he's used all of his skills, his value as a pure support drops drastically, and at that point you probably want him to leave the field. So overall, if you have animal trait units that you use actively, Noah would be a very good addition to your roster that can make your multi-core farming in particular a lot better. Anyways, hope you guys enjoyed the video. This was planned to release way earlier, but I had a lot of trouble cutting this down because I think the video is way too long for what it is, but I just couldn't shut up. So I apologize, and yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed the yap, at least for, I know part of my community do enjoy the yap, and I'll see you guys in the next one.